before Avengers Endgame, but after the Flintstones met the Jetsons, it was a huge crossover as the X-Men guest starred on this week's episodes of Spider-Man 94. This is the Superhero Pantheon. Now on this podcast, we will take 3 episodes of the Fox Kids version of Spider-Man that aired in the mid-90s and discuss review. This is not for Pantheon eligibility, but is a fun side project. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover the show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, this is a big one for the two of us because the X-Men animated series might be I would say it's my favorite animated series of all time in terms of like more kids fare, but yeah, this is a big couple of episodes, Brian. And you know, I think in 1994, before we had the Avengers and we've been spoiled with all these crossovers, and you know, we've had a Justice League movie and multiple Avengers movies and all these crossovers. Like, this was a big deal at the time because you didn't really see this kind of thing. And to have like the X-Men, like all the voices and all the characters are in both of these episodes.
Let's God bless the fact that both these shows were under production and under the same team at the same time, so we could have this crossover. Otherwise, there would have been some legal shit going on. And luckily, both shows are animated like almost exactly the same way. So there was no issue of like having like continuity issues in terms of like the animation style, because it was the exact same. So everything just blended together perfectly. And my goodness, I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed at least these 2 episodes. The 2 X-Men episodes were just so enjoyable. It just made me think of like how Marvel really, you know, landed with like some of the crossovers over the years, especially like Infinity War and Endgame, like those crossovers, and how like the characters interact with each other. And you could see the building blocks here, especially in the first episode when Spider-Man first meets the X-Men. Of course, it's always like when you have a crossover, the 2 characters never get along at first. They end up fighting each other so they can test each other's powers, so to speak. And you got that here, so that was pretty fun. But when it broke down to it and they started to get to know each other, I couldn't help but think, my goodness, if we can't have MJ and Spider-Man in the current MCU right now, can we get Spider-Man and a Rogue relationship, please? Because I think that would be amazing.
So what you're saying is, Brian, you are shipping for Rogue and Spider-Man now.
I didn't even think that was possible until I saw this episode again, and I was just like, wow, that chemistry, and the fact that she's like probably really into him and they can't really physically touch, because you get that with Gambit and Rogue, but we never got that in the movies. And I don't know if they want to make it an older Gambit and a younger Rogue, because I'm not really cool with that anymore. But if they're the same age and Rogue's like 20 and he's like 20 and they're in college, that's a dynamic that can really work. You know what I mean? So looking at this, I got really excited at the potential of stuff going on in the future if they're going to bring the X-Men into the MCU. So, you know, and if they want to make Peter Parker a mutant, make him a mutant too. I'm cool with that, because if this idea that the spider bite enhances mutant powers that were latent or something like that, I'm cool with that too, because the way that they blend the whole mutant gene thing with Spider-Man in this one, because in this case, he's not a mutant. He was a human that was bit by a spider, but now that spider bite had mutations in the DNA that's mutating him now. So he wasn't born a mutant. So there's this thing between a mutant and a non-mutant, but the way it ties together with the genetics and everything. And I know it's, scientific, mumbo jumbo malarkey made up, but the way that they tie it in the comic book style of the writing, it just made perfect sense. That's why, Spider-Man goes to Professor X for help.
So what you're saying is if Spider-Man and Rogue were together, he wouldn't need a web slinger to shoot out like sticky stuff?
Oh, you went there. I didn't even think about going there yet, but you went there, man. I'm proud. I'm proud.
I believe that's the first kids joke that's ever been on the Superhero Pantheon podcast. So some history is indeed being made. Speaking of history, Spider-Man in the neogenic chapter that is entitled The Mutant Agenda. Brian, how does Spider-Man know that Charles Xavier exists but not the X-Men?
Yeah, that was the other thing. It's like, maybe the X-Men don't pay attention to ground level stuff. Like, maybe, I don't know, upstate New York versus, Brooklyn, New York. You know what I mean? Like that kind of difference.
But the X-Men were seen in New York City and multiple times in the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's how I have some of those questions too in the MCU. Like, how does Shang-Chi not know Ant-Man exists, even though Ant-Man was a giant at the pier in San Francisco in 2016 or whatever it was? So, it's just continuity. But at least they were able to, have the continuity in terms of, the animation and like the fact that, it's going into mutations and you have mutants. So at least they got that together. But I get what you're saying because, who's the Spider-Man guy? And then some of them did recognize him, I think. Some of them just didn't. But again, maybe that's how TV viewing was back in the day.
So Wolverine being Wolverine, he immediately threatens to carve him up, which is pretty fitting for the Wolverine character. We get a chase through the mansion. I think it stretches credulity for Spider-Man to be able to battle all of the X-Men at one time. And I get that this is Spider-Man's show, but it was a little bit weird. We do get a historic moment with Spider-Man battling the Sentinels until Charles Xavier finally, being the voice of reason, tells them all to stop. So we got a little bit of Spider-Man in the Danger Room battling the Sentinels, battling the X-Men. So you mentioned the animation. The one thing I will say is Gambit looked really off to me. I don't know about you, but just the color scheme didn't work for Gambit.
Yeah, they changed the color scheme. I don't know why. I think that might have been just like an animation error or someone in the animation department, or because sometimes or probably most of the animation cells, they shipped off to another country, and then poor people were working hard at work on the animation cells to get it done, and maybe they just got to skip the colors. But I did notice that that's one error that's not, that wasn't intentional. That's just an animation thing there, because I've seen that in older animations now that been watching Disney Plus and some Rescue Rangers and DuckTales and that kind of thing. Sometimes some animators will forget to put color in on certain cells, and you're just stuck with it. So that's one of those glitches in the animation. So
you may be right. Spider-Man talks about his mutation. Xavier talks about not wanting to cure mutants. I got to be honest, Spider-Man in this scene talking about wanting to cure mutants and the way he talks about the X-Men, kind of being a dick in this episode. I don't know. Spider-Man runs away. Beast gives chase as he and Wolverine kind of debate the situation. And this isn't really a debate that they ever had, that Wolverine and Beast specifically had on the show. I know there were episodes about a mutant cure, but that was more focused around Rogue. So it's weird to me that they involve Beast of all people in this debate as opposed to Rogue. And I also know that the Beast episode kind of focused on his looks and whatnot, but still it was a little strange.
Yeah, but I will say this, like the animated version of X-Men has the best version of Beast by far. And after watching this crossover, yeah, he's better than Frazier and what's his name in the newer version.
I think Kelsey Grammer was perfectly acceptable as Beast.
He was acceptable, but he didn't have enough to chew on. You know what I mean? Like enough meat on the bone to chew on.
I think he was underwritten. I think if you had given that character more to do, I think
it would have been closer to this, right?
I think even doing Beast as more of a CGI character as opposed to having him on all the makeup, so you didn't have to worry about the physicality. Also would have done some good as well. I think Nicholas Hoult is fine. I don't think he's particularly the problem with the Beast character. And the problem with Nicholas Hoult is the movie moves 30 years, and the problem is there's only a few years between movies. So I think we think of Beast as being so much older, and Nicholas Hoult is kind of playing an old Beast by the end, but he's not really an old Beast, if that makes sense. So I think that's
the problem. Yeah, and what I this is what I wanted a Beast, is that sophistication, that intelligence, that deep philosophical thought. Like those discussions he has with Spider-Man, and then later on that scientist, I thought that was some really, deep stuff. And that's kind of like what the whole themes and messages are of the mutants, and that, all the messages that go with that. So I thought, some very good writing there. You know what I mean? Because you really didn't get a lot of that in the Spider-Man episodes. They're more focused on like the heart, the humor, the action, less philosophical debate. But when it comes to the X-Men, that philosophical stuff does come up a lot because of the discussion of mutants, the mutant, so-called mutant agenda, all that kind of thing. And this kind of ties into, Spider-Man acting like that asshole you were talking about. He doesn't know, you know what I mean? He doesn't know how to like approach and discuss, mutants properly. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, we didn't know how to discuss that, discussion back then. Now we know, kind of like that woke thing. So it's almost like Spider-Man in a way is becoming woke to the fact of what mutants are and what mutants can do, and they're not necessarily an enemy. You know what I mean? And not all mutants see themselves as monsters. So that's another thing that he learns. And what I love about this too is, especially in this season, because he's so indecisive of what to do about the mutation in his body and this body horror going on, that all the actions at the result of every episode, it influences his decision making. So like at the end of this episode and the end of the next episode, it's going to influence him to seek out friendship. You know what I mean? So I love that they're tying in themes to that as well. So it's not just a bunch of random action towards the end. I feel like this, especially this season, season 2, they really focus on tying in the themes and the decision making and like stuff about friendship and not being alone, and that ties into the Spider-Man's decision making about what to do next, and that kind of ties into Morbius in the next episodes.
So despite the fact the X-Men are in this, I think Hobgoblin has my favorite line when he says, "I want to be around all my favorite presidents," in reference to money. And that is a line that needs to be stolen and used for other properties, because that is a legitimately great line. It needs to happen, Brian. That line.
I feel you, man. I feel you. That's definitely the best line he's had in the whole show so far. Also, was it this episode or the next one? But the fact that he hacked into the computer. Well, I think that's the next episode. I'm jumping ahead.
Oh, the hacking is bad. Oh my God, it's so terrible. We're gonna get to that.
Yeah, that's the next one. But yeah, because that was weird, because it's 3D animation mixed with 2D, and we're supposed to assume that. Yeah, whatever.
So
3D is not the actual.
we do get Kingpin wanting an army of super mutants. So. Brian, this is probably one of the more obscure things that we're ever going to talk about, but the actor David Warner plays Landon, and David Warner is probably somebody you've seen before, but you probably wouldn't recognize his name. But Brian, did you know that David Warner, working with genetics in this show, also did the same as the scientist in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Revenge of the Ooze?
Oh, you damn right I did. Because as soon as I heard his voice, I was like, "Oh my God, it's the scientist from Return of the Revenge of the Ooze," and I was thinking like he's doing the whole genetic mutation thing again. So we're definitely on the same wavelength. And I was like waiting for some kind of like Easter egg or something, because that was 91, 92, I think, when the movie came out, and this is 95. So I was waiting for some kind of Easter egg, like is he gonna drop something in the batter like he did in the movie? Yeah, he's a great actor. Like I think he's in Excalibur. Am I wrong on that?
I'm not sure. I recognize him from, he was in the 1984 Christmas Carol, and of course in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Revenge of the Ooze, and has a small part in Scream 3 of all things.
Oh God, that's one of my favorite Screams, and we could talk about that on another podcast. But
yeah, because
there's
I recently rewatched all the Screams, and I noticed him, and it happened to be around the time I also watched this episode too.
Oh, that's fitting. That's very fitting, because he does a great job in the voice work here. Because listen, he's got that natural evil scientist voice. Do you think? I think so.
I definitely think so. So we get Beast catching up with Spider-Man, but they're being stopped by a couple soldiers. Okay, one of the soldiers sounded like Creed, right? I didn't dream this.
You're talking Apollo Creed?
No, Creed from the X-Men show.
Oh,
it sounded exactly like him.
It's probably because, like multiple people take on multiple voices in animated shows a lot. They got to get an extra payday, so I'm assuming it's just the same voice actor. It's probably what it was. Because
it's possible, but it was
because there's been times where like I swear I've watched Batman episodes where Mark Hamill is not just the Joker, but like a random voice of a cop with one line, but it's only to get him extra lines to get him to that mark, I guess. to get the payday.
I mean,
Something like that. There's
perhaps.
weird contracts. There's weird contract things when it comes to voice acting that I've looked up years ago, but it's probably something like that. But yeah, you got to keep it in the family anyway. So
That is true. We get Cyclops flying the Blackbird recklessly with Jubilee. That was really weird.
it's Cyclops, man. He's never been a good pilot anyway. So
No, but like Cyclops is being irresponsible. That's not Cyclops.
well, I did find it weird that Wolverine was the one that called Spider-Man the loner. Well, you know what I mean? So it's a little off, but maybe this is just a different time because I feel like right now in this version of the X-Men, like in this part of their show, like clearly even though Cyclops is the leader, it's more Wolverine taking the reins.
So Beast gets taken captive. Spider-Man tries to save him. Of course, Hobgoblin joins in on the fun. We get a building almost collapsing, and Spider-Man can't save it. Now, visually, it looked like a super spider sense of some sort saved the day, but as we would learn in the next episode, it would ultimately be a new mutant who we had never seen or heard before, and we'll never see or hear from again, saving the day. Landon is the person who did the capturing of Beast. Landon wants to destroy all of the mutants and calls out what Beast wanted to do. He wants to purify the human race, Brian. So what does that make him? A eugenicist, which unfortunately is maybe a little bit too relevant now these days.
Oh boy, he's got the mind of a fascist, that's for sure. Jesus Christ. But I do like the fact that it did tie into Hank's past. So I do like it. I know it's a trope, but, you know, cartoon characters having their past come up and haunt them. And, you know, that's more than animated shows. But in this case, it really worked well because he's ashamed of his past, it seems like. And that was, so long ago, it looks like. And then, this idea that he's embracing what he became. And that, even Wolverine's like, I don't even want to know what you tried years ago. Don't even tell me. So that shame, you know what I mean? That guilt. I love that kind of stuff, man, because you don't get a lot of that heavy-hitted stuff in kids shows. So when they're doing this kind of thing, it's like, okay, yeah, there's some really good character development here. And that's why Beast is the way he is, because he feels guilty for what he tried to take away from himself. And then it physically changed him even more. So he just embraced it. So I love that kind of, because we get that story in the new trilogy, or in the newer, X-Men trilogy. But I think, I don't know, just something about the way that it was done in the animated, even for the short, brief time here, something about it where just seeing him being a scientist and losing control of it, you know what I mean? It's kind of tragic. So I love that kind of tragic storytelling.
So we get Spider-Man setting up Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin admits to knowing Landon's secret agenda and tells Spider-Man what he intends to do with him. And at this point, of course, Wolverine shows up and doesn't ask questions, goes right into the action, calls out Spider-Man for getting Beast captured. Hobgoblin gets ready to throw a pumpkin as we immediately get ready for the next episode, which is Mutant Revenge. I have to say the payoff to this crossover is pretty lame. It's pretty lame, Brian, as we get Wolverine making threats, wanting to know where Beast is. The pumpkins are thrown. Spider-Man very quickly thwarts him, and the mutant haters, led by Landon, shoot some missiles. Kind of a lame payoff to the cliffhanger. And I get that that's kind of a thing that just happens, but you get this really dramatic moment of him throwing a pumpkin, and then it doesn't phase at either of our heroes.
That's kind of been the joke with the pumpkin bombs. I think it's because they're more so to distract you than to actually blow you up. So, but as a kid, you're thinking, oh my God, it's a bomb. What I was pretty impressed with was the fact that Spider-Man pretty much body slammed Wolverine like a good, it wasn't even like a slam. It was like a throw, like a body throw. And I was very impressed because, damn, to throw Wolverine like that, that's some pretty impressive strength, man. So to see Wolverine and Spider-Man go at it is very, very satisfying as a geek, as a comic book fan. So to see that, and then their interactions afterward, that's where the money is. Because I think if you listen to our podcast over the years, you know for a fact that my favorite stuff about superhero crossovers and superheroes coming together is them doing just regular shit and them just talking. I was like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff right here. Spider-Man and Wolverine talking. Give me them talking about food. Give me them talking about TV shows. Give me a Spider-Man Wolverine crossover where they just talk about stuff and let the action kind of come later. But I think that would just be incredible. Like a Tom Holland, Hugh Jackman team up where they're just kind of like having this older, almost like a father-son type of relationship, but in the vein of, but in Spider-Man and Wolverine's clothing. Give me that, because this was great for the 4 or 5 minutes that they were together, just talking, chopping it up, and Spider-Man making all these quips towards Wolverine, and he called him Wolvie, and Wolverine just didn't say anything about it. So did you notice that too? Because I was like, damn, he let him fucking say that. I think older Wolverine
Yeah,
would
that
have
was a
just
little
went
bit.
at him.
Yeah, I think because it's not the X-Men, I think he was able to get away with it. If this were the X-Men animated series, I doubt that he would have been able to. So we do get Spider-Man and Wolverine going after Landon together. Beast talks about his background a little bit and thinks the female assistant helping Landon is also a mutant. And then, Brian, we get the worst hacking scene that I have ever seen. This scene, Brian, is so it's this highly sensitive information about a quote unquote mutant cure, which I propose for the remainder of this episode we call the dip, like in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because that's kind of how it looked and felt at times, that it was just the dip. He takes all this information and puts it on a CD-ROM. Brian, why is such sensitive information able to be downloaded so easily to a freaking CD-ROM? I understand it's 1994, but come on.
Okay, so if my calculations are correct, Johnny Mnemonic and Hackers had not come out yet, or did they?
I believe Johnny Mnemonic came out probably the same year as this.
Okay, so it's probably this idea of what people in the 90s thought like steampunk was, or what they didn't know what it was, and they thought this was what it was, and then what it became into now. Yeah, it's kind of like this idea of like we don't know what hacking is, so we're just gonna portray it as this, and then it's just a giant face of Hobgoblin on the computer that says I got your information. Oh man, that was bad. This is the one really bad cheesy thing about this crossover episodes, but you couldn't help but laugh at it because it's like it's 1994. Whether they don't know any better, but the fact that it was a 3D version of his face on the screen and it's like a 2D real life. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like real life is 2D, animated is 3D in that universe. It's so fucking wild, but yeah, just so laughable.
So Hobgoblin decides to throw the CD-ROM into the acid almost as quickly as he downloaded it. And then he pieces out for the episode, Brian, because instead of Hobgoblin going after and interacting with the full X-Men team, Landon himself does a big jump, turns into a mutant, and feeds off electricity to get stronger. Brian, I'm going to give you the floor to talk about what Landon turns into, because I'm sure it was giving you some Godzilla villain motifs going on.
Yeah, so this is basically what's the name? It's the Beast from 20,000 Phantoms, I think. What's the picture I sent you? I forget, but I have the Blu-ray, and it's a Ray Harryhausen production, and it's that classic monster that starts out as a little tiny alien and a little rock that grows once it's kidnapped by a kid, and then it grows to this giant monster that is threatening to destroy the city. And this is exactly what that was, because he gets bigger and bigger as he absorbs electricity. And that was pretty creepy, and the way that the creature's designed like that. Yeah, I think it's the Beast from 20,000 Phantoms or something like that, but man, it looked exactly like it. And I don't know if you picked up on this as well, but it kind of clues you in on what's going to happen to Spider-Man, because he grows 4 extra arms, this creature. And what happens to Spider-Man in the next episode at the end? He grows 4 arms. So they did a good job of foreshadowing and telling you like something's going to be really fucking going crazy with Spider-Man, because imagine what this guy what happens to this guy. Imagine what's going on inside the body of Spider-Man right now, where he's like, all these genetic changes are going on, and it gets worse in the next episode. But they were like really foreshadowing what's going on, and I would say this creature is very like well done, well animated, horrendous looking. It gave you all those creepy like almost H.P. Lovecraft type vibes, and I thought they did it really well. And the way that the creature kept growing and growing, getting out of control, and then the X-Men had to step in and help. That's the big crossover. There was no giant beam in the sky. I mean, there was at the end kind of, but it was going down towards to pick it up, so that was more of an anchor. It wasn't a giant beam going up into space, as I know Jerome really hates. So overall, I think the big conclusion was really well done. And yeah, I thought, I mean, Jesus, that thing was so well done, and it was green, and they didn't have to like put so many like different details on it. It just looked disgusting as is. So for that creature feature design, I loved it. And they kind of had to save it because like they can't kill him. So what they had was the psychic lady that was hiding the fact that she was psychic the whole time. I don't know what she did. Did she like calm his mind and he just kind of like decreased in size and went back to normal?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the impression that I was getting, and we do get the reveal of the assistant being a mutant, a pretty powerful one. You would think Xavier would have been able to find her or something like that. So yeah, some of the weird continuity things, but X-Men gives Spider-Man his props because this is Spider-Man show, so it's about Spider-Man. Spider-Man decides, oh, I shouldn't be alone, so he goes to Dr. Mariah Crawford and continues to work on finding out what is happening to him. So I really like these two episodes. It's no secret I'm a huge fan of the X-Men animated series, and I think you got a taste of it here. You really didn't get a lot of involvement from really anyone except Wolverine and Beast, but I think you got just enough from the other characters to make it really interesting. And Spider-Man having people to interact with, I think, is a hugely positive thing because it's something that he didn't really get a lot of in the first season. And you also get some more horror. Clearly, the writers of this show are huge fans of Ray Harryhausen and the horror genre because there is even a reference in the next episode to Bela Lugosi. So clearly fans of the horror genre.
Yeah, and of course, as a kid, you don't pick up on that. And as you grow older and become more of a movie nut, as we become, I mean, I got a box set of the Universal horror movies right next to me. You know what I mean? And I told you I got that Beast of 20,000 Vandals or whatever on Blu-ray right next to me too. So it's like they kind of didn't know what they were having. You know what I mean? They didn't know that how influential they would be in terms of the writing later on, because this seems very like like Tom Holland in Civil War making all those Star Wars references. Like, you ever seen that old movie? This feels a little like that. So I'm glad they kind of got this down in terms of like having these popcorn Easter egg references, but you watch something you'll pick up later on. So I really enjoy that. And overall, we have the part 8 out of 10, the second part 8.5 out of 10, because man, that monster was unbelievable.
So we transition into Morbius in the next episode. And look, regardless of our opinions on the movie Morbius, this character does absolutely nothing for me. So the Morbius stuff absolutely does nothing. The powers are weird. The visualization of the character, both in his human form and non-human form, just does absolutely nothing for me. And I guess I'll be curious to see, like, when Blade comes around, how this all looks and how it comes across. But I was not impressed. The Spider-Man parts of it, I think, are pretty good because you get Spider-Man talking about a cure for his becoming a mutant. We even get like the stereotypical Spider-Man stops a bank robbery along the way, but this time he can't get away, and the robbers are very close to actually killing him. Spider-Man specifically references feeling like he's being stabbed by Wolverine. We get Crawford telling Spider-Man to not take the cure, that it would be unethical to do so. Spider-Man completely snaps. Really good stuff, again, from Spider-Man. And I'm sure that you noticed that the name of the mouse that they experimented on was named Mickey, right?
Oh my God, I didn't even pick up on that. Jesus. And that's some definite foreshadowing for sure of what's to come for the Marvel, but not Spider-Man, because he's still on by Sony. But yeah, little things like that make me smile. But excuse me. But in terms of Morbius, I think the reason it doesn't work well for me is because I don't think he actually fixes because what happens is he comes from this town somewhere in Europe, and his town was ravaged by some disease, and so he goes to America to become this, a scientist and figure out what he can do to make a cure for this disease. But we never actually get back to that. I think he just kind of forgets about that, or they even forget about that in terms of the writing. So that's kind of disappointing, because I do like that idea of him trying to find a cure for more than just himself, like in the Morbius movie. So in terms of that comparison, I think that was a good start, but then they just kind of got lost in this whole like, well, we can't do vampires because it's a kid show, and we can't say sucking blood because we can't say that. So we can say sucking plasma, but we can say blood in every other instance, but just you can't say sucking blood. So there's these weird restrictions and rules that kind of get created with the Morbius cartoon version. And then he can't bite people. So he's got like these weird, I want to say like David Cronenberg, like suction lips that are just very, very, very David Cronenberg, and I don't think they realized how sexualized it kind of came off. Because like when he first attacks that first dude, it looked like the dude had like a dozen hickeys on his face.
Yeah, it looked a little strange. I'm not gonna lie. It was definitely not their best character design. That is for sure. We get Morbius looking at the cure. We get our Bela Lugosi reference, and yeah, we get some interaction between Morbius and Spider-Man. We discover that the sun can turn Morbius back to being normal. We get a little bit of Felicia. We get a little bit of Mary Jane, but not too much here. We do eventually get Spider-Man taking Crawford's medication, although Crawford discovers something else is going to happen to Spider-Man, and it's more arms. Spider-Man ends the episode by getting more arms, and we also get Felicia visiting Morbius, and Morbius does turn back into a vampire, but Felicia alleges that Spider-Man is the one that has captured Morbius. So kind of a harrowing ending and an interesting cliffhanger to what I would say is a mixed bag of an episode.
Yeah, because again, this is where that body horror stuff plays in, because the whole episode he's like, "Oh my stomach, oh my stomach," and you're like, "Oh my god, like, is he gonna blow up? Is something gonna come out of his stomach?" Like, you think alien and stuff like that, but as a kid, you're like, "What is going on here?" And you don't know. But as a kid, the first time I saw that cliffhanger and then to be continued when he grows the arms, I was like, "What the?" You know what I mean? I was just like so blown away by it. And then years later, watching everything in order and then watching it again now in order, you could see that they were like definitely foreshadowing it, especially like I said, with the creature in the previous episode growing forearms as well. And the fact that he's talking about his size and the fact that a spider with the multiple legs, and it just played into that. Or the multiple limbs, I should say, it really played into that. And now he's becoming this human hybrid spider monster that he's got to stop quickly because it's going to get even worse. And yeah, that's one of the best to be continueds I think I've ever seen in a cartoon. It's the fact you see your hero grow 4 extra arms and then it's like, well, see you in the next episode. I mean, that's some really dramatic stuff right there. I don't even think like, because when like Batman 66 does something like that, it's usually like attached to some machine that could easily get out of. But how do you get out of fucking growing 4 arms? You know what I mean? You just can't like all of a sudden be in the next minute of the next episode out of that predicament. So it's something permanent for at least a while. So that's, you know what I mean? Like it's very, very body horror. And I really dig it, man. And like I mentioned, the Cronenberg stuff. And I don't know if the feeling of it was supposed to be intentional, but looking back years later, it's like there's a lot of weird Cronenberg stuff going on in this movie. Or excuse me, in this show, because it feels like a Cronenberg movie by the end of this episode.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I am so curious to see because I remember him getting 4 arms, but I don't remember a lot of what happens after that. And like a lot of this is kind of new information for me, so I'm very curious to see where this goes, and I'm really excited to see. I think the second season has been better than the first season in most ways. I think the fact that I think the serialized stuff in this episode is actually what works the best, and the Morbius stuff doesn't really work. But I think the storyline, the ongoing storyline, is so good that I'm still enjoying the season even more than the first time. And you've got the continuity, you've got the guest stars, and I'm very excited to see what we will be discussing next week. Because Brian, next week Spider-Man goes even more mutant, and we are going to get a visitor from another prominent Marvel character, so that's going to be really exciting.
I think it's 2. I think it's back-to-back episodes, right? Where we get, spoiler, the Punisher, which makes, perfect timing since, they put that, the Marvel shows from Netflix on Disney Plus recently. So, tie in there. And then the fact that you got Blade coming in, who has the Shaft kind of vibe to him in the show. I really dug that, and I can't wait to see that again. And that's like back-to-back episodes. It's so crazy.
We don't get Blade until a little bit later. Blade is in episode 11, so we don't get.
Oh, okay.
We get the Punisher for
that. That kind of reveals how long we're getting Morbius in the next 4 or 5 episodes. So there you go. It's going to get crazier and crazier, and while in the background, it's Spider-Man trying to deal with this big, huge problem. So it's one layer after another, and it's going to get really intense by the end.
Alrighty, so that is pretty much it for this week, Brian. Next week we'll be talking a lot about the Punisher plus a whole lot more. That is going to be some really good stuff, as we will be continuing our journey discussing Spider-Man, the animated series. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
Yeah, give me a movie where it's like Wolverine and Spider-Man and they're eating like sandwiches together. And then, Wolverine, like, offers to cut a sandwich because he's got a blade.